Hello. In this video, we'll be looking at advanced stacked widgets. So I will be going over some things that quickly that I've already covered in the basic stacked widgets video that I have posted. So if you haven't seen that, please watch that first if you're not familiar with stacked widgets, as that covers a lot of the basics that I'll move through quickly in this video. So we have our cross-control virtual machine open, or the development environment, and I'm gonna come to Qt Creator as we've done in other videos, and I'm gonna create a new project for this one. So we'll be using widgets as we're using a stacked widgets project. We're gonna run through this pretty quickly. So I've gone over what all of this means in other videos. So I'm just gonna call this advanced stacked widget. I'm gonna build it for the virtual development, and I can select, one of our ARM displays, for instance, but we won't be building for our displays in this video. We're just gonna build it in the virtual environment. So I'll use this 800 by 480, and I don't need versioning or version tools like Git in here. So okay, so we have our starting project through cross control here, the starting project template. So we're going to quickly add a few things. So we're going to come to the designer and add a stacked widget here. So come down here, find stacked widget. I'm going to delete or cut that out and make this stacked widget my entire screen. So for what we're going to do in this video, making it the entire screen will, I think, make sense later. So it doesn't need to be the entire screen, but I think it'll help. So what our intent is for this video, different than the previous basic videos. So in the basic video of stacked widgets, I showed you guys how to create a stacked widget and create multiple pages, really as many as you want. I don't know, there may eventually be a limit to the number of screens you can have in a stacked widget, but if there is, I've never hit it. So we showed that, and we showed then how to move between different pages of a stacked widget within our code. So as I mentioned at the end of that video, a stacked widget's really good if you have just a few pages in your application. Maybe 10 pages is okay. But once you start building up to 20, 30 pages of your application, it can get pretty unwieldy having a stacked widget with 30 pages, and each one is filled with a lot of different widgets and things like that. So it can get difficult to kind of work with and navigate. So one of the things I like to do is create a new UI class for logical segments of what I'm working on. So for instance, we'll use this application class as our main controller. And then maybe we'll have a few different classes, like for the displays, it makes sense you would have some machine parameters which would show different CAN signals or something. So we could have a machine class and a settings class, and each of those would have a UI accompanying them with potentially a stacked widget and multiple pages on those. So that's kind of what we'll replicate here in this video in a simple way, and show how that can be done, so you're not doing everything in one single stacked widget. So the first thing we're going to do, and this will also go over how to dynamically load and remove pages from your stacked widget. So the first thing we're going to do is come here and actually just remove this page. So you can click on page 2 and then right click here on stacked widgets and say page 2 of 2 delete. Okay, so now you can see we only have one page in our stacked widget, and that's perfect. Never actually tried to remove this page, but so we can make this our main welcome page. So what I'll do for the purpose of this video is just throw up whatever you want to be on your first page of your application. You can do that here, and I'm gonna change this style sheet really quick here to. So there's another video on style sheets. If you're not familiar with those, then please go check out that video. Okay, so I have a welcome page here. I can do some basic things to make it look a little bit better here. Okay, good enough. All right, so now that we have our welcome page, let's create a new UI class. And we're gonna go ahead and call this one machine info. So I'm gonna come up here and click on my project and say add new. And in this case, I'm going to find Qt here. And so, you can add different classes through here. I mean, C++ and Qt are probably the most of them that you're going to use most frequently, but you can do other ones. And in this case, we're going to add a Qt designer form class. So you can get a description here on the right. So this essentially adds in both this UI form with the header and CPP file, which is what we want. But you could do each one separately. So you could just add a form and then come to C++ and add the class or the header and the source file completely separate. But in this case, this makes it easy. So we're gonna choose widget here. You can find descriptions of all of the different ones online. I mean, in short, a dialog box is mostly used as some sort of pop-up, so it'll pop up over your main widget. Main window adds in this like kind of border, and it'll add in like a menu bar, I believe, something like that. And a widget's just, I believe, the same almost as a main window, except without the menu bar, more blank. So the default size, you can choose one here. In our case, we're gonna do that in a second. So I'm gonna hit next, and we're gonna name this machine info. How about? So it'll automatically change the name, so we'll keep everything like that. It tells us the path it's gonna add it to, which is our project path. That's perfect. So nothing else changed. It asks us if we want to add it to version control. As we don't have version control here, we're not going to do that. So we're just going to say finish. Okay, and so it'll come up here to the UI of this class that we just added. So you can now see we have the machine info header file, the machine info CPP file, and then our UI form. So if we double click back here, what we can do, since we did not change the size of it when it first started, is come up to geometry and make it 800 by 480 to match our main application window. So you can see, it's 801 for some reason, 800 by 480. There we go. So now everything matches. And if we come back here, we're going to, we'll say, set up a few very quick things. So, I don't want to spend too much time in this video going over basics, so I'm going to just be able to identify what we're doing with a label, if I can find it. There it is. And just for, again, identity purposes, I'm going to change the, can't type, I'll change this one to blue, and I'm gonna say machine info here. And let's just make this white. There we go. Okay, so some basic identification. Then in our machine info screens, we might want some different things. So here we might have, say, in our machine info, like 4 or 5 screens showing our machine information. So in that case, we can come in and add a stacked widget to this screen. And here we go. So now we have a stacked widget on this screen, and we're going to use this stacked widget to scroll through all of our machine information. So in this way, we can come to page 1, and let's, drag in some. We're going to drag in a gauge here on page 1. I'm just going to quickly add things, since it doesn't make a difference here. I think hopefully the point will get across. So, and I'm going to come in and say add another page. So I'm going to say insert page after previous page. So we have now a page 3, and I'm going to throw a vertical gauge on here. How about? So we have 3 pages right now, and we're sort of pretending that each one of these pages shows some more useful information about our machine. And obviously, when you're actually building this up, you're going to have quite a few widgets on each page. So, the intent here is that your machine info is a logical set of pages that are its purpose is to show certain machine info. So machine information. So you'd make, a limited number of pages. So maybe like 5 or 10 pages under machine info. You'd have 5 or 10 pages under settings. You might have a user. So, it's up to you guys how you split up your application. But this is just kind of showing the idea behind it. So, okay. So we're going to also go ahead and add some push buttons. So I'm going to take this, and let's say I'm going to call this, so screen 2. So whoops, it's on. All right, so this is on page 1 of my machine info, and I'm going to just use these push buttons to move from screen to screen. So on screen 1, I want to go to screen 2. On screen 2, I want to go to screen 3. And screen 3, I want to be able to move back to screen 1. And the last thing I want to do is on screen 1, I want to be able to move home. So back to my main application screen. So I'm going to call this button home. Okay, so we have now a basic setup of machine info. So let's do one more, and let's create a settings info class. So we're going to right click, say again, add new, go through the same thing that we did. And I'm just going to call this settings info. And the intent here would be that the user can come in and modify settings. So the same thing we just did, 800 by 480 in size. I'm going to actually just come over back to my machine info and copy some of this stuff here. So I'm going to copy the stacked widget and this. That actually did copy. No, it did not. Oh, so there we go. So the label at least copied, and I'm going to drag in a stacked widget. So again, exactly the same idea here. We'd have another class, which is our settings information class. And I'm going to make this style sheet red. Sure. Okay, so here's our settings screen. And again, our stacked widget comes in with 2 pages. Let's just do exactly the same thing. So we'll just keep it at 2 pages here. We won't add another page. And in this case, I want to go to screen 2 of my settings, and I want another one to come home. And in the second page of my stacked widget, I want a button to move back to screen 1. And we'll just set up something to identify what screen we're on. So let's set up a radio button on screen 1. It's something that you might have in the settings screens. And we'll set up a CC checkbox on screen 2. So this just identifies the different screens for us. Okay, so right now we have these 3 different classes. Our main application is going to open our application class on starting. So the main is going to first call application, and this is going to be shown. Okay, so we'll do a little work here. Let's add in 2 push buttons here to move to our different classes. So for one, we're going to move to our machine information class. And for 2, we're going to move to our settings information class. So you could, you notice I only have 1 page in my stacked widget, but I could set up multiple pages here in my main application, and that would be fine. So, on page 1, I could set up multiple pages and it would work just fine. There are also alternate ways to do this. So I'll sort of talk about those as we go forward with the programming portion of it. But for now, let's start here. So I'm just gonna change the font of this to something. Okay, so here we are. So let's come in and just make sure we haven't done anything horrible. So we're going to come down here and select virtual development and attempt to build our application as is. So we don't expect much here, but it should build and our main screen should pop up. But as we haven't done anything else, nothing else should work. So that's exactly what's happening. This close application, well, I guess that also doesn't work. So let's begin setting up some of these buttons. And I noticed in my main application, it's black on black. So I'm gonna just do that. Okay, so that should look a little bit better to identify the push buttons. And I'll do that right here. Change. There we go. So let's get to programming here. So we come to the edit form and we're gonna first come in our application, and what we want to do is simply let's look at, I guess I moved a little too quickly. Let's look back at our application UI here. So what we'd like to happen is when we click on machine info, this button here, we'd like to move to our machine info class, which we set up here. And from there we can navigate our stacked widget that we have set up on machine info and move through those screens. And alternately, when we click on settings info here, we would open and move to the settings info class and be able to move through our stacked widget there. And vice versa, when we click home, we would move back to our main application class. And then if this isn't obvious, when we click the close application button, we want to close our application. So let's start in on programming this. So right now, notice that we have only one page of our stacked widget. So this is page 1 or index 0 of the stacked widget. So as we talked about in our basic stacked widget video, the stacked widget is a 0-based index, meaning that page 1 will be index 0, page 2 will be index 1. So with that in mind, let's look and start programming our interfaces. So let's just do this one very quickly. So we're going to right click, say go to slot. In other videos we talked about signals and slots, so I'm not going to go over this too much, but suffice to say that by selecting clicked, we are going to initiate an event when this push button is clicked, and we can then program code for what we want to happen when the push button's clicked. So in the case of close, we're just going to close our application. So we're going to say this.close, and we are done there. So let's go do that for now, machine info and settings info. So in this case, when we click machine info, let's set this up. So we want to move to our machine information class here that we've set up. So to do that, we need to add this class into our stacked widget of our main application. So right now we have just one screen, but we want to dynamically add machine info and settings info when the application starts up. So if we come into application.cpp, we first need to essentially tell our code that these classes exist and can be called by our main application class. So we can come into application.h and include our two classes here. So machine info, and we're going to include settings info. So now we have told our code that these two classes exist. Now we want to create an object for those classes. So we could create either a static object or a pointer to them. So in this case, I'm going to create a static object, and we'll see how that's done. So I'm going to first say machine info, and I'm going to call this mock info. Not a very good name, but I'm short on time, so I can't come up with clever names. And then I'm going to do the same for settings info. So settings info, and I'm going to call this set info. How about? Okay, so we've now created objects of these classes here. So when we open this object or add this widget object, we should be taken to this main UI. So from our application.cpp, so here's where we're going to first get into how to dynamically add things into a stacked widget. So in this case, we're going to add all of our secondary classes during the initialization phase of our application class. So this code is essentially called on when the application is initiated from our main.cpp here. So it's going to initiate our application and call this code. So at this point, we're going to load our two other classes into the stacked widget. So to do that, we can say UI and then find our stacked widget. So the UI object will show you all of the different widgets and objects on your UI screen. So we have our stacked widget, which is the main one in our application. Okay, so if I say now add widget, you can see here we can add a widget and it takes a Q widget, a pointer to a Q widget. So if you come into our machine info class, you'll notice this is inherited from Q widget. So this will work. So we can come back here and it takes a pointer, and for how we set this up, we set it up as just a static object. So we need to give it a reference to that object. So the and I think I called this mock info. Okay, and we're gonna do the same for the settings info. So stacked widget dot add widget and a reference to our settings info. I called that set info. Okay, so what this has done is it's going to add the widget after our current index. So again, looking at this, we have one page or index 0 in our stacked widget. So this will be added to index 1 and this will be added to index 2. Alternately, there is another function or method of the stacked widget class, which is called insert widget. Okay, and you can see here, you provide it an index in a widget. So in this way, you can specify, so I could have done insert widget 1 and mock info if I wanted to make sure that this is actually being inserted into index 1 and then set info into index 2. In this case, I don't need it because I'm doing this code in order, so it should work like this. But if you want to be more specific, you can use insert widget. I would say I've noticed if you try to insert a widget into, for instance, if I were to comment out this code and try to insert mock info into index 2, this I believe will insert into index 1. So you have to be a little careful because we don't have an index 1 at this point, since our main application again is just index 0. If we try to skip an index, I found it doesn't seem to work. So it won't skip an index or create a blank index 1. So I believe either this will insert at index 1 or it just won't work at all. So a lot of times I do it this way and just add the widgets in the order I want them indexed. Or for clarity, let's use insert widget, just so we are clear how this is working. Okay, so and 2. Okay, so I have, again, index 0 already created. Then I am creating inserting machine info into index 1 and set info into index 2. So I'm doing this on the startup. So for this push button to be clicked, I've probably named these things poorly, but you can see here push button is the one I set up to go to machine info, and push button 2 is the one I set up to go to my settings info. So let's create a event here, a clicked slot or signal for this button. So we have machine info and settings info here. So in this case, all I want to do is move my stacked widget to the newly inserted machine info here. So we've done this in the other videos as well, the basic stacked widget video. So I'm going to say set current index, and in this case I'm going to move to index 1. And for settings info, I'm going to move to index 2. Okay, so that should do it for moving to our new classes that we created. So let's just test that out. Oh, did something wrong. What is it complaining about? That's why. Mock info. I need to take the object and I was taking the class. Okay, so that's why it was a different color. I thought that was odd, but I couldn't spot the difference. Probably a bad idea to name your... I should have really named my object something like this to make sure you don't make this mistake. There we go. Okay, so let's try this again. All right, so it built. All right, so machine info works. Now we haven't hooked up these buttons yet, so we don't expect those to work, but we can go and test settings info. So now you can see that works. So when we click the buttons here, we're taken to our class or our class object. So machine info, we are taken to our machine info screen, which we expect here. So perfect. So now actually the hard part is sort of done, except for one little tricky part, which I'll show now. So the only other real trick is coming back from this. So we have this on machine info and settings info, we have this home button. So we have to be a little careful with circular dependencies here. So in some ways it makes sense to, in your machine info class, set up and include back to application so you can move back to application through its main stacked widget. But we essentially need to be careful here. So we want, when this machine info button is clicked, this home button, what we actually want to happen, because we're not moving this stacked widget. When this home button is clicked, what we're actually doing is moving this stacked widget from our main application class. So we want to move back to index 0 or page 1. So now in our code, we've dynamically added these two new classes or pages to our stacked widget. So we now have index 0, index 1 is our machine info, and index 2 is our settings info. So when the home button's clicked on machine info, we want to move back to index 0 or our first page of our application. So how we can do that is we set up a signal when that home button is clicked in our machine info class. All right, so we're going to set up a signal that is going to tell our main application when the home button is clicked from our machine info class. So if you're not familiar with signals and slots, I'll post a video on signals and slots, but there's a lot of information online. It's a pretty key concept for Qt, so you should be familiar with it or get yourself familiar with it. In this case, I'm going to set up a signal called home button clicked, or home clicked, how about? And all right, so we've set up a signal. I was messed up there for a second, but we set up a signal called home clicked, and we can come into our machine info here, right click this home button and say go to slot clicked. So when this happens, when that button is clicked, we want to emit our home clicked signal. Okay, so we are going to emit this signal, and when this signal is emitted, we want our application class to do something about it. So in this case, we want, when that signal is emitted, that means that our home button is clicked, and we want our main application class to move back to our main page. So in our application class, we're going to set up a private slot we're going to call move home. Okay, so this will move us back home, and we're going to say refactor add definition in application.cpp. Okay, so to move home, all we're going to do is move our stacked widget back to our current index of 0, oops, which is our home screen. No, not, should be set current index. There we go. Okay, so when we want to move home, we want to move our stacked widget back to 0, which is our home screen. So how do we, so right now we have this slot that's set up to do that, and we have a signal coming from our machine info class here. So now we just need to link those two together. And again, this takes some familiarity with signals and slots. Again, if you're not sure what I'm doing, please go check out signals and slots, as I won't cover it too much in this video. But what I'm going to do here is say connect. That's going to connect a signal and a slot. And I'm going to say connect you first say signals. So the first one, and we're going to use our mock info. Oops. I renamed it. There we are. And I can say signal, and we are going to find our home clicked signal that we set up, and we are going to connect that to this, okay, this application class, and the slot is going to be move home. Okay, so now we've connected our signal, which is emitted when this home is clicked, and it will trigger the slot that we set up called move home, which is going to do this code. So we've now connected it, and we should hopefully, if we've done this correctly, expect that our machine info will move back home. So we can click machine info, we get here, our nothing else is active, we haven't done anything here. But if we click home, we move back home. So perfect. This is exactly what we want, and our close application works. So we've successfully linked back to move from our machine info class back to our main screen of our application. So you should really think of your application as your controller for the different classes and, you know, your main kind of stacked widget. So I always think of it like this is my main stacked widget, and the application is my controller or loader, and it's going to control the classes it moves to and things like that. So we can do now something exactly the same as we did there in our settings class. So we're going to say signals here and set up a again a home clicked. We'll make it the same. Let's just copy some code from our machine info class. Well, I guess we don't. Yeah. We'll just do it this way. So again, coming here, saying go to slot clicked, and I'm emitting this home clicked signal when that happens. And now I come back into my application class. I am going to I'm going to reuse this move home slot, because all this does is set the current index back to our home page, which is screen 0 or screen 1, index 0. So all I need to do now is connect my settings class. So I've already done this with mock info, so I'm gonna just change this to set info. The signal should actually be the same, but if you want to confirm, we can delete the signal, and this will bring up the list of signals coming from set info. So we see the home clicked, and again, we're just gonna connect it to the slot move home. So perfect. So let's build that, make sure everything works. So now we can come to our machine info, go home, come to settings, go home. Awesome. All right, so now truly the hard part's done. The only other thing that we really need to do to make this work is link these buttons. So just make them move within the stacked widget here. So in our machine info class, we have 3 pages in our stacked widget. So we can move between these just like we've done in the basic stacked widget video, and as we've sort of shown in this video. So when we click screen 2 on machine info, we just simply want to go to page 2, not this, UI.stackedWidget.set current index, so page 2, which is index 1. And I'm gonna just copy this, come back to machine info, and do this create classes for everything. So when that's clicked, we want to move to page 3, which is index 2. When this one is clicked, we want to move to page screen 1, which is index 0. Okay, so this should loop our in this class. So our first push button's clicked here. We increase the index from 0 to 1. Second one, increase it from 1 to 2. And the third one rolls back over to home. So we go back to index 0 of our machine info class. So remember, this is a different stacked widget here that we have than our main application class, which we're loading in these additional classes. Okay, let's do this really quick for settings info. So we can go to slot, clicked, UI, no, it's just, okay, so UI stacked widget, set current index 1, and here we roll back over. So in this case, we only have 2 pages. So when this is clicked, we want to go back to index 0. Okay, that should do it. So let's build it. And here we go. So we're going to go to machine info. So we go up. So I noticed one thing, and we can fix that. So if you noticed, when I did build, I went to machine info, and it initializes at screen 4. That's because if I come here, I'm currently on it in the developer. But in my code, what I want to do is when this class is first entered, I want it to initialize at index 0. So just like we did in the basic stacked widget class or video, I can say set current index 0. Okay, so when these initialize, or when I first call them, I want it to move to settings 0. There we go. And keep in mind, since we did write a static class, it's not a pointer, so we're not creating a new class every time we load it. It should stay, we'll see here. It should, when you move back home, well, I guess you're always on the first page. So, okay, so that works. We're gonna come to screen 2, screen 3, back to screen 1. So this, our cycling works. Now we can move back home. We can come to settings info. We start at, oh, that did not work. Settings info. Welcome back. A little break in the video as I messed up something with the settings class, and it took me a second to figure out where I made my mistake because things were not working. So if you saw, whoops, before, there we go. If you saw before, when I build, I was getting here, but I couldn't move, and I had to figure out why that was, and I made a dumb mistake, which I'll keep in the video and point out just so I don't need to remake the whole thing mostly, but also so you guys can maybe learn off of my mistake. If you look at my pages, where it seems like this should be, I should have made this page 1 where the home button is, and I even say move to screen 2 here, and here I say move to screen 1, but really if you look at how my pages are set up, they're backwards. So this is technically screen 1 here, since it's index 0, and this is screen 2 here, which is index 1, but my naming and sort of setup doesn't match that. So sorry that it's a bit confusing, but if you pay attention to the indexes, so this is index 0 or page 1. So when I say move to screen 1, what I should be moving to is index 1 or the second page. So I'm gonna again come here, go to slots, and you'll notice to figure this out, I use this QDebug. It's a pretty helpful debugging technique. I won't go into detail in this video, but if you're not familiar with it, check it out. I'll also make a video about how to debug your applications if something's not working. But in this case, I just used it to print the current index that I was at in my terminal down here. And through that, I could see that I was not at the index I was expecting. So in this case, I believe I want to move to index, or you know what, let's just make this, sorry for making this video very long, but I'm going to change this. So I'm going to take these 3 things, cut them, put them on this screen, and I'm going to take these 2 things, cut them, and put them on this screen. So I'm hoping this won't mess me up, but now when screen 2 is clicked, I actually do want to move to page 2, which is index 1. So I'm going to say move to index 1. Oops. And when this one is clicked, I want to move back to index 0. So if I didn't mess anything up, this should hopefully now work. So settings info, screen 2, screen 1. Okay, so perfect. So move to screen 2, move back to screen 1, can go back home, machine info, scrolls through, go back home, closes. So perfect. Everything is now hooked up and working. Again, sorry for the slight confusion and longer video here on my mistake here. Hopefully it wasn't too confusing. I've used a couple things in this video that I haven't gone over. I'll try to follow up with, as I said, a video on signals and slots and debugging techniques and things like that. But hopefully this should give you guys an idea of how to set up maybe a more complicated application where you have a lot of logical splits. You know, in this case, we've set up a machine info class, which has a couple screens for that, a settings info, which can have some screens, and obviously we could have gone and made a lot more. So, and we could really keep going and do this, embed different things. I was going to talk about doing this without a stacked widget, just having your applications, when I click this button, it will open your new class over it, not using the stacked widget. So that's actually a pretty similar technique. I don't know that one is better than the other necessarily. And just because this video is now very long, I'm going to push that to another video. So hopefully this was helpful in letting you guys see how you can set up different classes and objects and adding those dynamically to a stacked widget. Oh, and the last thing I'll say is there is a method in the stacked widgets that is remove widget. Okay, so if you want to remove a widget, I could, for instance, you know, so even though here we're dynamically adding the widgets as the code starts, but you could do it based on certain events happening, for instance. So let's say when I come and add or go to our second page, let's say I want to remove the machine class at that point. So I could come and, you know, not that this makes sense in our current setup, but essentially I can get to machine info, but when I go to settings info, I should have just removed my machine class. So now I expect that when I try to move to machine info, you see it goes to settings info because our machine info is in index 1, but has now been removed. So when I execute this code and click on this button, our settings info has now moved to index 1 to fill in the missing spot for machine info. So just keep that in mind. You can remove classes, but they'll move down in indexes as you go. So, and now if I click settings info, nothing happens because now there's nothing in index 2. Settings info has moved to index 1 because we removed machine info. So just a quick demonstration here. Hopefully this was helpful. I'm going to remove this because it's not actually what we want to do. All right, thanks for watching.